So the first thing that I really noticed when I started playing a bit of classical again after doing jazz is that I could start to see how the mechanics of the music was functioning on the fretboard much, much more comprehensively.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FretDojo podcast. My name is Vin, and today I have a very special guest. He's going to look familiar to you. Mr. FretDojo, Sensei Greg O'Rourke. Greg, how are you doing, sir?
Sensei Greg. I like that, Vin. Thanks very much. Great to see you all here. Welcome to FretDojo once again. And this is a bit of a different one because this time Vin, my amazing co-instructor here at FretDojo, is interviewing me about something. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we were having a conversation recently that I think we both agreed maybe we should save this for the podcast because this is getting a little spicy, perhaps a touch controversial. So let's save it for the audience. We've heard this question and this topic has come up from various members in the community on FretDojo.com, but also recently in the new boot camp. A lot of people are coming at this learning jazz guitar for the first time, but they're coming from a classical guitar background. And you said something that caught my ear, and it caught other people's ear too. You said that learning jazz guitar actually makes you a better classical player. Did I hear that right? And if so, can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, this obviously will raise a few eyebrows because I'm one of those guys that has a bit of a unique angle on this whole thing because I've actually studied both styles in a lot of depth. When most of my early career was almost exclusively on classical guitar. I was absolutely obsessed with it. I mentioned recently on a workshop we did that I played at the Opera House. I was a touring musician in classical, but I found myself there was something really missing in what I was looking for in music, and that was that kind of creative impulse. And I've always loved the sound of jazz guitar, even since I was a little kid. So I have a lot of love for that music. So I started to study it. And over many years, I ended up transitioning into jazz guitar. But this was the most interesting thing for me, is that for a long time, I just stopped playing classical guitar. I was basically playing jazz guitar exclusively for many years. I've been teaching it for a long time on...
You mean just stop totally? You didn't try to balance the practice? You didn't pick it up every now and then?
Well, that was my next obsession, playing, just getting straight into jazz guitar. But what I noticed, what happened is that occasionally I got booked for a classical gig, playing at a wedding or a function or something like that.
It dust those chops off.
Yeah, that's right. But interestingly, I didn't. That's the weird thing, is ironically, I actually felt like I was a stronger classical player, even though I wasn't practicing classical guitar at all. Now, that's kind of going to be a bit of a whoa moment for a lot of people that are really into classical.
I can hear the rumbling in the crowd now, yeah. Because
so leave some hate comments, people. Just go, for those of you watching live, feel free to...
Out of two, if you're feeling nothing but rage right now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's like I can see everyone indignantly going, how could that be? But, this is just my story. This has been my experience. So, and over the years, I've thought, why is that the case? Why do I feel like I'm a stronger classical player from playing jazz? And there's a few reasons, I think, and I want to go through those today. And for those of you that are classical players out there that are watching this, you might want to think about, maybe even if you aren't interested in transitioning to jazz, at least kind of doing some of the things that you tend to study more in jazz and applying it to your own classical playing could be very beneficial. So, shall we get into it?
Please.
All right, no worries.
I've been waiting for this for a couple of days since we talked about
it. With bated breath.
Breath.
So here's the first thing, is when you study jazz, you tend to learn the fretboard much more in a comprehensive system. Now, I know classical players do learn notes in positions and the various positions of, say, keys and things like that. But what you need to do as a jazz player basically forces you to have a really resolute understanding of the entire fretboard in basically every key. And the way that you get there is by having some sort of position system to it. So what I use is Joe Pass's 5-position system with a combination of like diagonal scales moving through those positions. Now, jazz players have different systems. There's the 7-position system. There's the 3-note per string system some people use. I've even, my friend Ant Law from UK, he even tunes his guitar in completely in fourths, so that everything is identical across the fretboard, which actually simplifies things a lot. However, you won't end up being able to play any other guitar if you do that. But
trying to think about doing that now after 30 years of, that pesky 3rd to 2nd string interval.
Man, yeah, I don't think I could bring myself to relearning all my vocabulary in that system. But you get the idea. So jazz players that are really strong players, they have a really comprehensive fretboard map. So you know not just what the names of the notes are, but what the actual patterns look like in each position, how the intervals sound when you cross from string to string. So having a fretboard map is uber important. Now, to be honest, maybe it was just the way I learned classical, but I really didn't have that down. I was learning classical guitar kind of on a case-by-case basis. Each piece would just be its own piece on itself, and I would study that piece, and I would really work on the expressive techniques and the dynamics and the phrasing and all that sort of stuff. But it's not like I could sort of recreate that sort of sound of that piece like improvising, because I just didn't have that map of the fretboard figured out. Every piece was a map onto itself. Okay, so that's the first thing that I really noticed when I started playing a bit of classical again after doing jazz, is that I could start to see how the mechanics of the music was functioning on the fretboard much, much more comprehensively. Now, that gives you a few advantages, because when you know the fretboard so well, then you tend to make less mistakes. You tend to be more confident on stage, because you've got that kind of extra engine running. Like, firstly, the first engine is like the piece of music itself that you've memorized and you've practiced, but then having those underlying guardrails, or guide rails, I should say, of where you're hearing the notes, and you can tend to see on the fretboard where that sound would be made. And so that's now, all great musicians in all styles tend to do that, by the way. Like, I'm not saying that classical players by and large don't do that. I'm just speaking from my experience. That was something that was really missing in my understanding that really developed as a classical player.
Well, you said that originally, a lot of the original classical musicians, perhaps even the early guitar players, they actually did improvise a lot. It isn't like It is now, where it was all structured. Do you think they had mapped out all these positions?
Oh, they must have. Let's not even talk about guitar players. Let's talk about J.S. Bach, right? Like, he was well known as a fabulous improviser and also amazing composer. But it's almost heartbreaking to think of all the amazing music. If we had an ability to record him back then, like when he was alive, like he would have had thousands of amazing pieces of music, a lot of them which would have been improvised. And so that's an issue, I think, with the classical idiom, is that it was improvisation was part of the tradition, but now it's kind of been lost. I have studied with a couple of guys that have gone really deep into like Baroque improvisation. When I was at university, there was a couple of guys that were really into that. But by and large, it's very scant. You don't see many classical players that improvise, and in fact, a lot of them are scared to improvise. And this is one of the reasons, maybe just not understanding the functional relationship of the mechanics of the fretboard in the guitar case, in the guitar's case. But I think this is something that can really augment your playing regardless of whatever style you want to play. Now, so that's the first thing, right? Is just understanding the map of the fretboard. So the next thing, and this was probably the most important thing, is that I could hear the music more. Like, my ears were more developed. I could understand the harmonic structures in the music more comprehensively. Okay, so not just hearing the piece as a beautiful piece of music, which it is, but really seeing the movement from chord to chord, hearing the melodic patterns that go through the chords, and like this is good. I'll just grab my guitar for a sec. So this is a good example. This is one of the cello suites from J.S. Bach. If we listen to this, like firstly when I was playing, it was just like, etc. like that. So it's like, oh yeah, that's a very pretty piece of music, right? But now when I started playing, after I came back from jazz, it's like, oh wow, I can hear all these interesting harmonies. Like obviously this is a fairly simple harmony, this first chord. It's a just a D chord. But then it's like, this is almost like an E minor 7 chord. Okay, it's like an E chord with it, but this is how I'm thinking of it anyway, with a D in the bass. This really lovely pedal tone in the bottom. So you can hear the D here. And then in the next chord. And then the next chord. This is really interesting. This is like a sort of an A7 chord with a D suspension in the bass. So really beautiful. Isn't it beautiful? So a little bit tense. And then going back to the D. So I could start to see what chords they were in terms of the actual chord names, but it goes deeper than that. Like from a jazz perspective, this is actually almost like a jazz tune. So we've got chord 1, that's the D, and then E minor, this kind of E minor chord is the 2 chord, and then we've got this one, A7, which is, what's that called?
The 5. Your 5, sure.
Going back to the 1. So what do we have?
We got your good old 2-5-1.
Exactly. Okay, so now that's really powerful because you can start to, it's another guide rail for your ears. So you can hear where the harmony is going, you can understand it on the fretboard, and what's the result? You're not as nervous on stage. This is the problem. I see a lot of classical guys and they're terrified on stage with good reason. Because they haven't got all these other engines running in terms of having that really secure basis for understanding the music and understanding the fretboard.
When you were approaching all this purely as a classical player, you weren't thinking about these. You were thinking
I had no idea.
Notes. You had no idea. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, maybe that's just how I learned it. Like, maybe I wasn't a very good classical player, but I actually, technically, I was one of the best. That's the ironic thing. Do you see how I was literally really up there in Australia for a long time? But inside there was kind of this big hole of understanding of music that, because you didn't really have to know it to be able to play the pieces, you kind of tended not to worry about it so much. You might sort of have a very superficial understanding, but not really hearing those harmonic movements. And so seeing them on the fretboard, really understanding, this is actually crucially important, because it means that if you do ever forget the music, this is a bit rusty, you can tell I'm sort of fishing around some of the notes there, but I can hear it that way. I can remember it more easily. Okay, so there's a lot of benefits to having this deeper understanding of music that's often missing. So we do have a comment here. Oh, Drew, you're late but arrived. Great to see you here, Drew. So we're on a bit of a controversial topic today about does learning jazz guitar make you a better classical guitarist? So for those of you that are watching live or watching the replay, feel free to leave a comment and let us know what you think, and make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel. It really helps us out so that we can keep making more videos like this. All right, so the thing is, when you're playing a classical piece by yourself on stage, I remember that time I was playing at the Opera House and there was literally thousands of people. It was like this packed crowd, and was playing just with my little guitar by myself. Obviously, that's a pretty high pressure situation. You know what I mean?
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah, because it's just you. It's just you making these notes.
Every time I ever had a crowd like that, I had 4 other bandmates with me. I could hide if I was having a bad night. I mean, kind of hide, But yeah, just you up there, that is some pressure.
That's full on, yeah. So you need to have a management system in place for dealing with those high pressure moments. And so this is the thing. If you do know how to improvise, even if it's not an improvised piece that you're playing, if it's a classical piece, knowing how to sort of get around the music, around those structures, and to come up with some ideas is really important. So like what could we do here? If we keep going. See how I was just like playing the chords, but you could hear the intent of the music was still kind of there, and so it's very relaxing because there's never going to be a moment when you play a classical concert where you're not going to have a slip. Like, well, at least for me, like a full set of like 60 minutes of solo guitar music, you're never going to hit a perfect 10. And so just like a skateboard player. What I'm talking about, a skateboard rider, I've seen these guys that compete at skateboard tournaments and stuff like that. It's not about not falling, but it's knowing how to fall gracefully that sort of saves you from injury, right?
Yeah, and this is not just a matter of knowing like what scale or you can jump into at any particular moment. It's like the overall structure of the tune.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So like in case you have like a little brain freeze, which we all get. And you're not sure like what comes next for a second, it hits you, right?
Yeah.
If you have like an overall structure of the tune, okay, well, after this piece, it goes to the A minor and then to the D7, right? Like rather than have to rely on the exact line you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, this is just a backup plan, isn't it? It's not like saying that you could just go and, like, that's not the style with classical music. It's not like you go and sort of, well, at least these days anyway. I'm sure maybe Bach was different. Like, I'm sure he would have gone on some amazing tangents in his pieces if he was performing something. But these days as a classical player, you don't tend to improvise just for the sake of it. It's a very useful fallback skill that's nearly never taught in that tradition, but it's crucial to getting more confidence. So that's the other thing that really helped me with classical playing after, like, from my jazz studies. Okay, so because this is the thing, Vin, I've noticed that when classical players play, a lot of them, they just look at the visual music. It's like a sort of a visual cue with the music written on the page, but that's not actually music. Like that's just a symbolic representation of music. That's just an approximation. There's so much more that goes into music than just these black dots and lines on the page. And so that's just a mental cue to help you firstly learn, and then if you need it, to remember where you're up to. But you shouldn't use it as this kind of, you shouldn't be transfixed on that as the primary reference for your music making. You need to actually be in here with your music making. It needs to come from deep inside, and that the music is just a cue. Like it's just something to help you remember. Now,
which is sort of how people approach jazz and more contemporary things. You've got the music; it's to kind of help you keep your place, and like learn the melody. But after that, you're kind of on your own a bit.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. There was actually I read a book about memory a few years ago, and there's an old myth about memory. I think from I'm testing my memory myself here, but it was from ancient Greece or something like that. And there was like a god who was the god of memory. Okay, and then one of his kind of underlings came up with this idea of writing, and he came back to the god and he said, hey, isn't this amazing? I've figured out like how to write down language. So this is fantastic. People will never forget anything ever again. And the head honcho went, no, it's the reverse. Unfortunately, it's going to make people forget.
Sure. Yeah, because people used to memorize, right, like hours long poems and things before. I can't imagine people doing that now.
Yeah, we're really reliant on that as a crutch now. Okay.
Sure.
And so, regardless of whether you're interested in improvisation or any of those things, getting yourself off the music as much as possible. You can still have it there on the music stand when you play classical, but just use it as a general cue, like not so much as something you read note for note and get very sort of fixed on. There's too much going on in your guitar for that anyway. So anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, so getting your music into your ears more rather than in your eyes is a huge benefit to learning a style like jazz. Now, a couple more things. This was another thing. I'd internalize the rhythm better. Okay, so classical guitar, there's obviously you're playing solo, and so you do a lot of the time. So you have an opportunity to push and pull the music a bit. You know what I mean? But to be honest, I remember doing a competition once in classical guitar when I was younger. It was something like this. It was a tune like this. Oh, I haven't played this for a while. But I was playing it like this. I was going like...
I do that when you're playing solo.
but it's sometimes it's a bit too overdone. And I remember the guy that was the judge. Unfortunately, I didn't take out that competition that year. I learned a good lesson because the main comment was, "You're making me seasick." Harsh but fair, right? Much. That's all right. Well, good lesson. Good lesson though. But so, like, when I've adjudicated classical, like sometimes I've been asked to go and adjudicate competitions myself in classical guitar. For a few years ago, I was getting a few requests like that. But I was noticing that sort of thing because I'd done a lot of jazz, but I was listening to these guys play, and the rhythm was all over the place. Like rubato, that sense of push and pulling needs to be a very subtle thing in classical, and you need to kind of make it up. If you're going to do a more drawn out phrase, you kind of need to catch up the rhythm in other places to kind of still keep the rhythm flowing, because otherwise it feels like you're getting slower and slower as you go. Okay, so jazz is great because it gives you this internal feeling of rhythm. You're always playing to a beat usually, unless you're playing chord melody. So you're either playing to a backing track, you're playing on a play along, or in a band or at a gig or whatever, and sort of that constant liveliness of the rhythm is always there in the background. Now that's really powerful training, because that's another way that you need to understand music, is in that sort of rhythmic element, and because that's where the life comes from in the music. And so that's particularly difficult as a classical solo guitarist, because it's just you. So you need to manufacture and kind of engage in that rhythmic aspect constantly. Okay, so that's a really important aspect of your playing, regardless of style. But if you're playing in classical, in the classical style, it's really important to foster that sense of rhythm in your playing. You can then pull around that a little bit if you want a bit of rubato, but sometimes even in the jazz style, I find that a little bit overdone. You know what I mean? Like for example, Joe Pass's Virtuoso albums, they're amazing in terms of the arrangements and the technique. I just find sometimes he's just going too way off in terms of the rhythm. But if you listen to like Ted Green's solo guitar music, his single album that he made, that's really rock solid. If you listen to that, that's an example of solo guitar playing where the rhythm is really really steady, and it's much more, I find it personally much more engaging. It's a matter of personal taste, but generally the rhythm is something the audience will hang on to, so you need to make sure that that's a constant flowing element in your music.
I'm soaking all this stuff in, because again, this is a bit of like a different world for me. So I can only imagine, like a lot of people who are come to the Fred Dojo podcast are coming from a jazz world, so they might be feeling like what I am. Like, I didn't know about the classical world, but was there anything else?
Well, I think just overall, like, this was just my journey, right? So you could see that I had quite a few holes that needed to be kind of filled in, and learning jazz was a really good way to make me a more robust musician overall. But everyone's journey is different, you know what I mean? So, but if you are a classical player and you're noticing that you've kind of resonating with some of the things I'm saying, for example, you're worried about making mistakes, you feel like you haven't got the fretboard down, you can't remember the music, and you're relying on the visual cues, then learning jazz might be an interesting pathway for you to explore. I'm not saying you need to be the top of the world-class jazz player, but even learning some of the basics can really, really help you foster your music development overall. So yeah, just something to think about. If any of you guys are learning that style and you're interested in learning a bit of jazz, we've got a whole bunch of free resources on my website, FretDojo.com. And you can, there's also some courses and there's also our membership program with a big community there as well. We have a lot of fun learning tunes and techniques month to month. So plenty to get into there.
It's a fun place, the Fret Dojo. It's a busy place, some great people there. So.
Yeah, no, it's a cool vibe in there. So so check it out. I think there's you can get a discounted offer on our membership program if you look at the description below this video, might see you in there. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's session. So that was all about the controversial topic of does learning jazz guitar make you a better classical guitarist? So my opinion on that is it definitely does. Thanks for hanging out today. It was great hanging out with you all. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel if you're keen to get more videos like this sent straight to your email inbox. So just smash that like button, hit that subscribe, and we'll let you know when the next one's on. All right, Vin, well, it was great chatting to you today.
It was a pleasure. Always fun chatting with you. Always fun doing these. Thank you.
Cool, man. All right, take care, guys. And we'll see you in the next one. And for more jazz guitar lessons, tips, and free stuff, visit www.FretDojo.com.